I'm Andrew. Hi. I am the, head of coffee, head of community with Flair. So I'm here to, again, try to help you guys get to better results pretty quick and not waste a lot of coffee, because that is what happens when you first get a machine, a new grinder. You end up wasting some coffee trying to get to the sweet spot. So don't be deterred by that or disappointed, because that is just kind of standard. That's how it works. And as you go, even when you think you've mastered everything, you're going to continue to find that certain coffees that you're going to rotate in are going to just mess you up and put you back at ground zero, and you have to make changes to your grinder, maybe your temperature, your pressure. There's going to be some adjustments you're going to have to make to dial in for every coffee. Even as coffee ages, try to get coffee that's fresh, but not too fresh. There's a lot of home roasters in our community that are trying to brew their coffee in the first day, 2, 3, 4, 5. Honestly, I try my best to not touch I'm a home roaster too, you can see. I try not to touch my coffee or anything that I buy for at least the first 7 to 10 days. Let it kind of settle in and then start working it. You'll still see it changing, but those first 5 days can be maddening. You're gonna have a lot of extraction issues with all the alpha gas, and generally from the CO2. Coffee needs to settle, but not having enough CO2 is also going to, and aromas and flavors is also going to be a problem. So try to get coffee that has been roasted within the first 7 to 21 days of use, and try to finish it hopefully within a month, month and a half. You can always try some schemes like putting it in the freezer, and that's a good solution for maximizing it, especially if you like to get a bunch of different coffees and you want to like cycle through them. I will warn you though, that's challenging. Like I said earlier, when you're using different coffees, you're gonna have to make adjustments. So if you want to keep things simple, get one coffee, start with one coffee, master that coffee, and then when you get that done, move on to another coffee, and on and on and on. When you think you've got a good handle on the different coffees and what they need, and that's like roast and development and other things like that, you'll pick up on that when you just open the bag of coffee. Just try to keep it simple. Also, if you haven't really started brewing with your Flair, I would recommend going and get inexpensive beans, not something precious, not something that costs you 15, 20 bucks for a bag, because you are going to waste the first few shots at least. Sometimes it's 3 shots, 6 shots, 10 shots before people kind of like figure it out, especially if espresso is new to you. So don't waste good coffee. Wait till you kind of get things dialed in, figured out what range on your grinder is working for you, and then go get the good stuff. All right, let me just check real quick. Let's see, I've got a couple people in the room, get them in. All right, and anybody else, you'll have to get in later. So again, hi, I'm Andrew with Flair, the head of coffee and community. Today I'm going to walk you through real quick what we're going to do for brewing. I have to check, there's a poll going on. Let me see what you guys all have out there. We have a bunch of different models. So we have the Pro, the Signature, the Classic, and it's a pretty good even split today. Still more people have the Pro than the Classic and the Signature. I've just been brewing with what most people have, so that would be the Pro today. You can see the good news is the differences between brewing with one or the other is pretty much small, minimal, especially if you're using the same doses and such. So it's easier for me just to stick with one, keep that consistent. I don't have to go grab whichever one people have the most of. So again, don't be too concerned that I'm brewing with the Pro. I'll talk you through classics and signatures, and you can always ask me questions too if you're still having something that I haven't covered. But yeah, I just want to point out that that if you have the signature, you have the gauge, and if you have the classic, you can add the gauge. But generally, you have the gauges, the cylinders, and the portafilters. And again, they all pretty much function the same way. It's just how much coffee can you use, how much water can you use, what can your yield be. So on these, you pretty much can get about 32 to 36 grams or roughly milliliters of coffee out. With these, you can push it to 54, a little bit more, depending on how much coffee and how much water. First things first, keep in mind, we are all manual. We don't have a heat source built in, so we need to make sure that this gets hot. This needs to be hopefully about the same temperature you're actually going to be brewing at. So what we like to do is preheat this. And some people, so if you have the Pro, you have a lot of metal here, right? This is all stainless steel machined. This is probably 2-3 times the weight of this one. This has a plastic encasing, a stainless steel basket. So I don't necessarily think you need to preheat your portafilter on the Classic or the Signature, but I can recommend if you do a light roast, a bean that's a little bit harder to extract, you probably should preheat that along with your cylinder. A couple ways to do that. If you're just going to preheat your cylinder, if you have the Pro, you have a preheat cap, you pop it on, and you can pour in hot water, 45 seconds, dump it out, and do that. until you feel like you've got this up to temperature. Now, if you're boiling at 212, that happens quicker. I'm boiling at 197 here in the mountains, so I have to do this an extra time, at least more than probably most of you. But I don't do the preheat cap at all. So if you have the Signature or the Classic, good news is most of us don't use the preheat cap, and I don't recommend you do it either, especially if you like a lighter or medium roast. You need to get this up to temperature, and the best way to do that is through steam or boiling. Some people put this in the bottom of a pot or a kettle. I generally like to keep it easy, and I just stick it in my, let me show you what that looks like, by the way. So these are funnels. One of our members showed us this. It's basically just a silicone funnel. It's safe to use, food grade, and temperature wise. And you can basically plop this into the kettle, the one that fits yours, usually 3.5 inches, 3 inches, or maybe 4 inches, depending on what kettle you have. And you can sort of slot that right in the opening here, and it will hold your cylinder up. And that is how I do it. So then that way, I'm not even paying attention to the preheat. It's just doing itself. I have to get my water hot anyways, so whatever I'm doing to get my water hot is what I'm using to preheat the cylinder. So I do recommend a gooseneck kettle. It gives you more control and pour. If you have like the really short spouts, it just can end up everywhere. Oh, I didn't need to turn this on. This is a kind of a newer kettle for me, so I'm not so used to how it works. But anyways, yeah, a gooseneck gives you more control. And also they typically have like a nice big wide opening that you can use for doing what I'm doing here. You have to set your kettle to boiling, otherwise you won't get the steam. And another good point is just go ahead and use water at boil while you're first learning, just to make sure you have as much thermal energy as you can possibly have, and then just catch it on the way down. You can use a thermal pen or some other way to read the thermometer, the temperature of what everything is, and then you kind of know, okay, I need 15 seconds or maybe 30 seconds. And that way you generally have enough energy to go into it. Because keep in mind, every moment, every minute that you're leaving things kind of sitting around after the preheat, temperature's dropping on you. So that we want to make sure that we're brewing at a good temperature. We're going to make sure that we're both having our water set at that temperature and the brew head. So while that's going, I'm going to set up, get going with my coffee. Now, if you were to use this as part of your preheat, you're going to have some moisture. I was kind of preheating this earlier just to make things a little bit faster. Generally speaking, whatever time it takes you to boil in your kettle, another couple minutes after that is good to get going. Make sure you don't have any moisture, because if you have any moisture there and you add the coffee powder, it's going to cake into certain places and that can cause problems later. So put that there. And I like to use scales, most of us do. It's important to keep track of how much coffee dry goes in and how much coffee wet comes out. So that's a brew ratio. I'm typically brewing my espressos in a 1-to-2, so 16 grams of coffee today, and I'm going to pull to about 32 grams out. And generally speaking, that works for me, especially if I like to use a latte or a cappuccino. And so if you're going to drink it straight, depending on the coffee, you might want to go a little bit longer to 2, 2.5, maybe to 3, depending if it's a lighter roast. It's good to run more water through that coffee bed. But generally speaking, if I'm going to do a latte or cappuccino, I'm keeping it at 1-to-2 and maybe a little bit less than that. Again, it's coffee preference, your preference, that sort of thing. So do what works for you. All right. I'll talk a little bit about grinders while I'm doing this. Your dosing cup, and it's a tamper, and I'll show you what else it's good for in a minute. But I'm going to make sure that I tear that out and weigh this out. If you have a grinder that is not a manual grinder, they're generally going to hold back quite a bit of coffee between shots. And it may not look like it if you're weighing it in and weighing it out, but really you're just pushing out the last 2 grams of your last grind. So if you're making adjustments, if you're dialing in, we'll talk about what dialing in means in a minute. If you're dialing in and you're trying to make adjustments, keep in mind you're actually using some of the coffee from the last shot. So it's good to purge as you're trying to dial in and get things set up. All right, so I'm going to put my cap on there. This is the Royal. It's our Flair grinder. There's a lot of good grinders out there. The main thing we need to be aware of is how much effort, like if you have an aggressive burr, this is a fairly aggressive burr, how much effort is it going to take to grind your coffee at a very fine espresso grind versus how much time, right? So like some people have some Harios and some other types of ceramic hand grinders. You could be there for 3 to 5 minutes. They're not very aggressive. It takes you a very long time. It doesn't have a lot of effort required because it's just making really small cuts at a time. But generally speaking, you're going to be there a very long time, and I'd rather put a little bit more effort into grinding it faster and moving on. Do make sure that whatever it is you're doing, that you're getting as much out that you put in. I'm not going to weigh it on the way back out of the grinder, because hand grinders are typically what we call zero retention. They're not really holding back. You can pretty much see all the coffee that went through the chute, through the burr, so you don't really have to mess with that too much. But you would if you have, say, some of these other grinders that have a very big bin for the grinds, because it can kind of hold in the corners and such, and then also in the chutes. Uh-oh, I do not have... Oh well, I would have showed you my WDT tool. It's a Weiss distribution technique, but I just noticed it's upstairs, not with me right now. Generally speaking, all that is just a way to kind of break up your coffee grinds to try to make sure that if your grinder is throwing out a lot of clumps, or just in general when you throw it in, it tends to kind of pile up to one side or the other. So you want to make sure you get that coffee nice and level across your bed before you actually tamp it. Because once you tamped it, you've locked in whatever's going on underneath there. We don't want to lock in bad issues, bad density and clumps and such. So I'm doing a little shake. Again, since I don't have my tool, you don't generally need it with a really good grinder, but again, when you pour that coffee in, you'll see it kind of piles up to one side or the other. So it's a good idea to always hit it with that. All right, I'm going to switch the view here for you to a top down. All right, so let me close that out of my way. So you can see that I have a pretty good distribution of coffee. It's not piled up to one side or the other. If it is, say if I want it to go that direction, you can kind of tap the side this way and the coffee sort of builds itself into that direction. You could do this and it goes back in that direction. So whatever side you hit it, you're basically creating waves and moving it in that direction, propagating it. So once you feel like you have it pretty good and evenly distributed, you're going to want to come in and give it a good tamp. Now, by a good tamp, I don't mean 40 pounds, 30 pounds. Generally speaking, a lot of us have come to realize that you don't need a hard tamp. You want to just make sure that it's consistent. Whatever it is you do it over and over and over again while you're trying to figure it out or dial in, or once you get a good result, so that you're not constantly having to figure out what just changed, what moved. You want to lock in as many variables as you can. So just figure out what works for you, what you're able to repeat and do it again and again. But above all, make sure you have a good distribution of coffee and make sure you keep your tamper nice and level. So I like to just kind of drop it in, slide it in, and I use my fingers. And the reason I do this is I can use the rim of this as a guide for me. And also I can replicate that amount of force pretty easily, as opposed to, say, putting my whole body or my shoulder or my arm into it. And again, I'm not a heavy tamper, so I don't need anything more than my fingers are going to produce. So once I feel like it's nice and level, I satted that, just pull it out. If you have a pro screen, people ask what side's up. It doesn't really matter as far as we're aware in terms of the actual brewing. It's just a manufacturing process that caused one side to look different than the other. One thing that we have noticed, though, is when it comes to pouring in the water, if you have, say, the smaller holes, these look a little bit bigger. If you have the smaller holes up, the water tends to stay above the screen a little bit more until you actually press on the lever. And so I just kind of thought, hey, until I actually want the water in contact with the coffee, that's a better outcome for me. So anyways, I like to slide it across the top so I don't have to mess with this 50% success rate of dropping it from up here. I just kind of push it and slide it, and it drops right in nice and level every time. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice I got a mirror for you, so I'm going to allow you to kind of watch what I'm doing here with that extraction. And I'm reaching over now to grab the cylinder that was preheating over here and placing that down. And the next question we get is, how much water do we add to this? And I'm going to say fill it up until you see water just come in to the well right there. And the reason being is this system works best when it's only water in the system and not air. And so let me turn off this noisy thing. So make sure you can see the water enter that well. And then when you add this, it just displaces it a little bit. It's not a problem at all. All right. So next step is to do a little bit of a pre-infusion for me, or at least a slow ramp. I recommend not going straight to, oh, I need a cup. Hey, Nobody told me that. There we go. And I'm getting ahead of myself. Get a scale in here too, huh? So I can weigh myself out. And I'm going to do a little bit, about 1 to 2 bars, just generally kind of seeing. So this might be a little bit faster than I wanted. I might have to have gone a little bit finer with my grind. Once I see that there's some drips, I'm going to lean in and I'm just going to hold this. Now, I'll show you what I'm doing later, but I basically just have one hand on the lever and the other arm I'm just placing across the top. This table is 40 inches high. It's really hard for me to pull a shot. So I'm using my body, just leaning right into it, and I'm just holding it nice and steady and trying to keep it at the pressure I need. And I'm watching the time and I'm watching the grams, and I'm going to stop this about 32 grams. And when I get to 32 grams, I'm going to let up pretty easy here on the lever, not too fast. If you lift up too fast, you got a pressurized system, bad things can happen. So nice and easy. And at this point, this is where I use my preheat cap, pretty much the only time. And that's just to catch drips. All right, so you can see that. Looks like some good modeling there in my espresso. And I'm going to switch back to the other camera here so I can talk you through a few other things. All right, cool. I'm going to move this out of the way here for a minute. And if you look at my cup, you can see that. Let me see if I can zoom in for you here. Might have worked. I think so. You can see that I have milliliters and I have ounces over here. I generally don't pay attention to that. In particular, reason for doing that, not paying attention, is your crema will occupy. Did I get focused again? I think so. Your crema will occupy some of the space in there. So if I'm just keeping track of milliliters or ounces, I'm not really going to know what my true yield is. So just make sure that you're actually weighing it out if you want repeatable results. I think I just lost my remote. That's a bummer. But it looks like I'm focused. I hope that worked out. Anyways, that's my shot. Now at this point, I want to stir it up, mix it up. If you still have your baby spoon like I do, that's a good time to use this. You can go in here and just stir it up, reincorporate. You want to make sure that you're getting, so when you first pull that shot, you're going to get salts and acids and things that are going to be a little bit heavier come out first to that coffee. You want to be able to incorporate all those different layers before you go to drink. Otherwise, it's going to taste differently as you're drinking. The other option is, so this is a Crew Propel cup. I don't think you can see too well in there, but there's these little fins that do a nice trick. So if I were to pull into that, I could spin it around and it's basically causing little vortexes and eddies in there and getting things moved around before I go to enjoy it. This is actually something I'm starting to get good at. My Guatemalan, I've had some problems as a roaster, and that's the thing. If you are a home roaster like me, sometimes the reason why your espresso doesn't taste so good is because of your roasting stinks, or you just got a new coffee and you're trying to figure it out. And that's happened to me, of course, a lot when I'm getting new coffees in that I haven't really figured out and I'm roasting them and it just doesn't taste right. And I've done everything I could possibly do to dial that coffee in and it still doesn't taste right. And, I go back to my roasting curve and see what I need to change and do. So I would say that most commercial roasters hopefully are doing a good job, but keep in mind, even when you get a good standby and you've been enjoying that coffee for a while, every once in a while, whoever's roasting that day might make a mistake. Your coffee may not be the same or similar to what you had the last time from that same company. So there's defects in the roast that sometimes people mistake for a problem with their brewing. There's also water quality issues. So that's another thing to talk about is, what kind of water are you using? If you're just using something from the tap, if you see a lot of scale behind on a lot of white powder and that kind of thing on your stuff, then you've got a really hard water and you need to use something different because hard water kind of acts like a buffer. You might like that. It kind of cuts through some of the acids. So if you're feeling like, something sour or something, that having some buffer in there can help. But if you want the best extraction possible, you should try to look for water that is ideal for brewing. There's different sources for that. I'm not going to go into it too much, but a good way to start if you don't want to get too busy is you can get, say, like a third wave water packet. It's one of the companies, there's a couple now that makes this. You add this to, say, 1 gallon of distilled water, and it puts you in the sweet zone. You could also try, say, like a Crystal Geyser is one that they say is kind of got a good mix of minerals. I think there's another one. Voltaic's expensive, but there's another water there. But there's some waters that are better than others. Just because it tastes good doesn't necessarily mean it's good for extraction. So pay attention to that as well. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to talk you through what to do with this brew head when you're done with it. Now, if I'm brewing with somebody else in mind that also needs a shot of espresso, then I want to work quickly, and I want to retain the thermal energy that I already have built into the system. And so I don't want to cool things off, rinse it underwater, to the best you can. Some people, I'm not very sensitive to temperature. I've been my whole life working in the kitchen and brick ovens, and so I can handle it more than others. But we've got silicone placed where it needs to be. So if you're careful and you use a silicone or find some other strategy that works for you, then you'll be able to work with that heat and not hurt yourself, burn yourself. So at this point, you can see that I haven't pushed all the way through. Like I said, I pulled about 32 grams or so, and you could go as long as 54. So I have more water in here. I don't want to rush and pull this apart. I want to take my time and be careful. So 2 options. I could just keep pushing the lever and emptying it out, or I can remove the portafilter or the whole brew head and dump it out over a sink or a knockbox or something. That's what I'm going to show you today. Also, when you grab your portafilter, your brew head, keep in mind if you just grab from here, it's just an O-ring that's holding that, and it's really not active. It's not pressing and holding and sealing unless you're putting pressure into the system. So if I just grab this with water and a wet, heavy coffee puck, I could separate the 2 things. So I'm going to push up as I pull up and make sure I get this out and not all over my counter. Next, go ahead and pull this out, twist it and get it out, and then just empty out the rest of your water. Now there's always going to be a little bit left in there, particularly when, so I use 16 grams, and there's going to be quite a bit of room in that portafilter where I haven't been able to enter it with the plunger. Like if I don't push all the way through, I'm not going to get quote unquote a dry puck. I can talk about that here as well. When I pull it apart, just keep that in mind. Twist it, spin it, rock it. Just make sure that you don't pull it and all of a sudden the 2 parts come apart, and then any of the water that's still in there gets on you. Now, people that like a dry puck, I don't really have that concern myself. I'm not worried about it. The reason why we don't have dry pucks versus, say, other machines, if you're familiar with other espresso machines, is when you cut the pump on those, there's actually cycling that's pulling out the water that was still there on the puck and sucking it out the other direction. We don't have that, obviously, so you're always going to have a little bit of water. It's always going to be a little bit soggier or softer than, say, some of these other machines that are really like pulling back out any of the moisture. But if you want, you can just kind of push through like that, and then you get what's left in there. But keep in mind, it's actually easier to knock out a wet puck than a dry puck. And then I just basically push and tilt up like that, get that screen out so I don't lose it in the trash can or whatever. And then, I advise you can make this. I show you online how to make it for like $9. Get yourself a little knockbox and knock it out. All right, so if I had the need to make another quick shot, like I said, I wouldn't bother with trying to run this all underwater. I would try to keep the heat as much as I can. So in this case, I would get a dry rag and just try to get out what I have left for coffee. Once you have that out, you can go ahead and prep this basket and pull another shot. And depending on how fast you are, obviously I'm not fast enough today. Depending on how fast up, did that real quick, wanted to show you. If you have the plunger and it's hot, don't touch it. Take your dose cup, push it back to the top. So I wouldn't want to dilly-dally if I'm pulling another shot. Keep this nice and hot. I may or may not need to preheat. I might just, where'd my preheat cap? It's over here. I might use my preheat cap just for that little piece there, just to get it back up. My kettle would have been continuing to hold temperature for me while I'm pulling the one shot and getting back to it. And then I can just quickly swap it out. Of course, I would say a better option would be to buy another one of these. And then when you have another one of these, you can quickly just swap it in and not have to spend any time cleaning or drying that out. And what else do I want to share with you about this process before I get going? Oh, I did mention earlier that you want to make sure that you fill all the way into the well. And again, the reason being is the system works best when it's full of water and not air. So if I stopped only filled to somewhere down here, and then I start to use that lever, what I first have to do is I have to compress the air. Air is very compressible, water is not. So I first have to compress that air till it won't compress anymore before it acts on the rest of the system, before it pushes down on the water and then pushes into the coffee. So I want immediate feedback. I want to feel not a spongy lever. I want to feel right away that I'm building pressure in the system. So that's one reason. I feel like you have a longer stroke. If I were to have air in the system, I'd be able to get my lever to right about here before I actually watch my needle do anything at all, because I've had to spend that amount of my swing in just compressing the air. Now I have a compressed system. The air has been compressed, right? And I stop my shot and I let go of the lever. Even if I go pretty slow, that air is going to rebound back a lot faster when there's air in the system. And that's when you can get separation here as well. So you'll see this pop off. A clear sign that you've been leaving air is when this pops off, it usually tilts forward. The back is the part that kind of like lifts and tilts forward. So try to keep water in the system. Now, if you are somebody who likes to brew volumetrically, and volumetrically means that you're basically weighing the water that you put into the system, and then you're pulling the shot all the way to the end so you don't have that separate step that I was doing where you purge or dump, then you can do that with, say, the Signature and the Pro, by presetting your plunger. You can place this down, do this before you heat everything up. And through trial and error, you'll figure out, okay, if I start with my plunger down in here, about 9 millimeters down, fill that all the way up till I see water in the well, and I pull that shot all the way to the bottom, I'll probably get a 42, 43 gram out. So that will give me a better way of not having to do the purging, whatever, but always making sure that I have water in the system and not air. I personally, again, would say fill it all the way up. Do what I showed you, because the other thing that's good about filling this up is there's more thermal energy, the more hot water getting in there that you can play with and work with. I think I got through most of it there. I want to look real quick at my notes and see what I might have missed. And then again, we'll go through some Q&A here in a second. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the theory of brewing, espresso, coffee, that kind of thing. I call it the extraction triangle. I don't think I was the first. Maybe I was. I don't know. As a photographer, videographer, there's three things that you know that you can kind of control the exposure. And so there's three things here that mainly control the extraction. And for us here, you have temperature, time, and pressure. Now, if you're short on one, you can go long on the other to get roughly a good extraction. And so the point is, say my time's running a lot faster, say it's becoming a quick shot for me, I might run that shot a little bit longer just to get more water through the puck and more contact time with it. I'm not sure if that made a lot of sense there to you, but the idea there is if I hit my yield, if I hit my 32 grams in say 25 or 30 seconds, I usually find that you get better results when you go to 35 or 40. So instead of stopping at my yield, I'll go a little bit longer, another 5 or 10 seconds, and just go with that just to get a better extraction and pull more material out of the coffee. So that's one way to play with that. Or pressure, same thing. So I like to brew usually 7 bars, somewhere in there, 6, 7 bars. You don't have to do 9. And I would say that most machines out there that say they're brewing at 9 are not. They're measuring it somewhere back closer to the boiler and not actually at the brew head the way we are. So if you want a shot that tastes like a 9-bar machine, you're probably going to find yourself around 8, 8.5 bars. A lot of us do like ramp up to pressure and ramp out. And so that's another thing you can do. You can play with pressure. You can ramp up to say 8 bars slowly over 10, 20 seconds, 15 seconds maybe. And then just as you get there, hold it for a few seconds and then just kind of drop it off again. Gauges are good for that. If you don't have a gauge, if you have the classic, one thing you could do just once or twice, just to kind of get a feel for what it looks like, what it feels like, is put your Flair up on top of a scale, a body weight scale that can handle, and then pull a shot and feel what 20 pounds, what 30 pounds, what 40 pounds feels like. Generally speaking, with the Signature and the Classic, to get to 9 bars, you got to hit about 40, 45 pounds of force down on your scale. So that tells you you don't need to go any more than 40, 45 if you want to hit 9 bars, and then you can kind of work your way back and figure out what that is. We also have in the, I did this once with a scale and a pressure meter and put it on our Instagram account, so you can go to the IGTV and see what that looks like as I was ramping up and ramping down to kind of give you an equivalent there. So once you get the body feel, you can start to know what you're doing without even looking at the gauge. In fact, I'm mostly looking at my mirror. I'm watching the extraction. I'm not actually watching the gauge because, again, I'm trying to get what looks like a good extraction, not, and the way it really looks and where it's coming out, as opposed to, say, like hitting numbers, because it doesn't always correlate. You can say channel, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but channeling means like you're pushing water through just parts of the puck, not the whole puck evenly. You can channel and still get your times and your weights, but it won't taste good. So if I'm watching what's going on, I'm going to know whether or not that's a good shot. With a bottomless portafilter, and again, if you have the classic or the signature, you pop that off. Some people don't realize you actually have a bottomless portafilter. Sometimes they never really read that part of the manual, but you can pull it off and you can see what's going on down there. What you want to see is you want to see this whole area filling in with coffee. You don't want to see metal throughout the whole shot. If you see metal throughout the whole shot, it means there's no water getting through that part of your coffee bed. Another thing, people have a lot of anxiety over what they call donut extractions. These baskets, I don't have a normal 58 millimeter basket on me right now to show you the difference, but our baskets are quite a bit narrower than a commercial machine. And because of that, if I say use an 18 gram or a 20 gram dose, which the coffee shop that I bought my coffee from, or that I just got that coffee made, prepared for over there, was using, I'm going to try to replicate that at home. That same 18 or 20 gram dose is going to be a taller bed of coffee because it's all fitting in a much narrower area. The wider open that your basket is, the more that sort of spreads across, and the lower that is. Now that changes things in the extraction. The coffee will mostly taste the same, the espresso will taste the same, but there's going to be differences in mouthfeels and things of that nature. Also, keep in mind that if they said they pulled it at, say, 25 seconds or 27 seconds, so you go home and try to replicate that, it's not going to work well for you. You need to, I would say, multiply whatever they tell you on time, about 1.3. 1.3 times 27 seconds puts you into 33, 34 seconds, generally speaking. And the reason being is because that same 18, 20 grams is filling up that basket taller, you have to coarse in your grind to get a good extraction out of it. If you go with a really fine grind, if you had them grind for you what they use and then run home and try to throw it through your machine, it's going to choke up. It's going to be too fine because as you add coffee to that pile, it adds resistance to the system. So we have to coarsen our grind. When you coarsen your grind, a little bit more time is good, is better for having a more even extraction. So keep that in mind. Again, with having a taller pile of coffee, that water needs to get through that bed. And what happens is it's like a slippery slope over here. You can feel how smooth your stainless steel basket is. That's the easiest place for water to go. So it's going to go down the sides before it goes through the middle, particularly if your grind is too fine. And if you see metal showing, you know that your grind is too fine. It's not uncommon for the coffee to start out here at the edges, but it should fill in pretty quickly as soon as you add pressure. It started that way for me as well here. When you started that pull, you start to see it out here, and then it quickly fills in. As long as that happens, you're good. If it never fills in, you've probably your grind is too fine, your dose is too high. You could loosen up your tamp a little bit, lighten your tamp. You just need to tamp hard enough that you're compressing the bed of coffee and closing out any kind of pockets, that kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be 30 or 40 pounds anymore. So you can do these sort of things to try to improve your shots. But do pay attention to what's going on down there. Get one of these, and at least for a while, and pay more attention to that than, say, the gauge or the scale, because this tells you mostly everything you need to know. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about in there? Grinder, dialing in. So if you're not familiar with the term dialing in means getting to the numbers that you're targeting. So if I wanted to say a 7 or 8 bar shot, if I wanted to pull it out in 32 grams in about 35 seconds or 40, I need to dial in my grind to get to there. You can't set it and forget it. So if you found a good number on your grinder that worked for you or your buddy, I see a lot of people get into our Facebook group and they're like, I'm doing everything like my buddy. He's got the same grinder, the same coffee and all of that. And it's not working out for me. Well, there's so many differences between his house and that house. What kind of water are they using? How is his preheat? Is it on par? The coffee, is it the same exact coffee? Was it roasted at a different time? Has it aged longer? What is his pressure profile? Does he pull straight to 9 bars? Does he go like I do, slow ramp? All these things makes a bunch of changes. Plus the grinders themselves, they're generally, my number 11 is not your number 11. And it's more so for certain grinders than others. Hand grinders a little bit closer. Grinders that have shims in there that create spacing that come from the factory. You might have 2 shims. I might have 1 shim. So my numbers are not going to correlate with yours. Focus more on what it looks like. Focus more on the taste, the flavors, things like that. Try not to share numbers. I know it gets frustrating, and that's the easy out. That's like the Cliff Notes, but it doesn't work out and only gets you more frustrated because you're trying to bang your head against the wall, getting good results with his numbers. It's not going to work out. What you're looking for is, again, generally a good extraction within the ballpark in time. If that means grinding coarser or lowering your dose, or if that means grinding finer or increasing your dose, or whatever it is that you need to do, given your grinder and your circumstances, do that. Stop using people's numbers because you're just going to go crazy. You're going to run through a lot of coffee and you're going to be real upset. So that's with dialing in. You're basically just making small adjustments. You go, okay, that ran a little too fast, so I'm going to go a little bit finer, maybe add a little bit. You're better off working with the grinder adjustments rather than dose or anything else. Keep everything else locked in. But of course, if you run out of grinder adjustments, which happens with a grinder that only has, say, 20 clicks or 30 clicks or 40 clicks, you run out of adjustments real quick. And now you're stuck doing other things like adding or taking away some coffee, adding or taking away some pressure, things like that. But again, use your grinder first to dial in. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, when you put coffee through that grinder, depending on what it is, it could be holding back a couple grams, 4 or 5 grams from the last. So you make sure that you purge out, throw in a few beans, run it through the new click, the new adjustment, and then put your dose in there. Otherwise, you could also chase the tail that way because you're making these adjustments and it's not working out. You can't figure it out. You're probably pulling in 3 to 4 or 5 grams of the last one. Even though it weighs out the same, it's just because it's stuck in chutes and it needs to get that pushed out and into your grind spin. So dialing in, that's more or less what we're talking there when we're talking about it. Puck prep, I mentioned that earlier. It's real important that you have a nice, even bed, a flat tamp. Good distribution is more important than, say, how much force you're adding once you've compressed that bed. So focus on that. And if your grinder is creating, say, a spread of, so there are no grinders out there that are like making exactly the same cuts. Some grinders are better than others, depending on what they are, at making all these particles about the same size, but the way that the coffee breaks apart in fragments also plays into that too. So you're not just dealing with, say, like a certain cube or size of a particle. It's a spread of particles. Some grinders are really terrible and you have a huge spread. It's more like a molehill where you have like kind of your target up here, but then it really gradually goes off. The better your grinder is, typically the more it looks like a peak, you know, like I don't know, Sierra Nevadas always reminds me like really tall peaks versus like rolling hills if for distribution of your coffee. But the better your grinder is, the more you get into that target. And so when it comes to your distribution of the coffee, if you have more of the same thing, then it's going to naturally be a good distribution. Now, if you have, say, a lot of powder and a lot of big coarse particles coming out, sometimes they come out and they get spread into certain parts of that bin that you pull out. And when you pour them in, you get maybe the bigger, coarser pieces here and the more powdery stuff here. It's not distributed well. So that's where the WDT tool, which you can see in the Facebook group later, what that looks like. You can make one for a couple bucks, just a cork and some thin needles. And you just kind of make sure you move around the coffee bed and get that all mixed up. Especially the worse your grinder is, the more you want to do that. Also, the worse your grinder is, maybe the harder you want to tamp. The better your grinder is, you can go kind of a lighter tamp depending on what you're after. But when you have a really, like a grinder that doesn't have a lot of clicks and you're stuck between like this one being so fine that it's choking and this one being too coarse that it's gushing, you really have to pack those together as best as you can to kind of hold back, let's say, the coarser setting there. Control variables, stick to one. Water, again, we talked about that. Grind too fine, so you can grind too fine. Ideally, for good extraction, you want to make those particles as small as possible because the bigger the particles are, the harder the water is going to have a time of getting in and getting out the material that it needs. It's also happening very quickly, so it's more of like an erosion or a wash-off process that we're getting from our coffee in like that 25, 35, 45 seconds. So the finer you can grind, the better, but it can go the other direction. If you grind too fine, you start to see metal. Where did it go? You start to see bare metal here, then that means that you ground too fine and you're not able to push the water through. So if you start to see bare metal throughout the whole shot, then you're going to need to coarsen that grind a little bit. So grind as fine as you can until you start having other issues like channeling. grind coarser, hard. And then the different coffee that you use. So if you have a darker roast, you can go a little bit coarser. If you have a lighter roast, you need to go a little bit finer. Generally speaking, that's how you find it works, both for getting better extraction, but also getting the water through the coffee. So that's one thing. The reason being is your darker roast is going to, the coffee is going to have expanded, bigger pores. The water has a much easier time getting out and getting the material. So if you use a lighter roast, grind a little bit finer. Your ratios and recipes. So by ratio, we're just talking again, 16 grams in today, 32 out, was my 1-to-2 ratio. But then the recipe includes other things like the pressure, the temperature, I'm trying to think some of the other things off the top of my head, but like the water you're using, like everything that goes into that. If I'm going to try to teach you how to bake some cookies the way I bake them, I can't just tell you to use, X sugar and this and that. I have to kind of give you more information about what I did differently all the way to the coffee. So let's share ratios and recipes together on Facebook and in the forums, rather than just, a double shot or a single shot, because what does that tell me? It doesn't tell me anything other than your yield was somewhere around 30 milliliters, 30 grams for a single, 60 milliliters, 2 ounces for a double. So that doesn't tell me anything about what else went into it. So singles and doubles, not very helpful. Let's talk more and all the rest of that. All right, frequently asked questions. This class is going on. I'm sorry about that. So earlier today, I did a quick little poll in the Facebook group and asked people like, what should I be sharing with the people that are just new to the system? And I got a lot of great information. That's part of what's caused this to go a little bit longer than usual. I'm usually wrapped up by now and onto the questions. But let me get through real quickly. These are the frequently asked questions that our customers have when they first get the system. First of all, you don't need to have the bolt inserted. If you're going to pack this away a lot, I wouldn't use it. You see I pulled a perfectly good shot without having this bolted in. There's a little bit of wobble there. It's okay because once I'm actually putting force in, it's forward in this direction and it stabilizes the system. So it's okay that there's a little bit of wobble here, a little bit of wobble here as well. This is all the way it's designed. So if you notice when you're playing around, I call this dry. Like I'm not making espresso. It's not wet. I'm not doing anything with it. I can notice all sorts of weird things that don't make sense to me. But when you're making espresso, it all works out. Keep the faith. If you have a squeaky door in your house, you're going to squirt a little lubrication on. Same thing here. This is dry pins and metal. So every once in a while you get kind of a little noise coming from this area. Just if you have something that is FDA, food safe, kind of a lubricant, that's best. If not, you can do some WD-40, turn it upside down, spray it in, wipe it all off, and you're good to go for a very long time. So that's that. You don't need to use a bolt or anything like that. If the gauge is not working, a lot of times we have the question like, I'm making espresso, I'm not seeing the gauge move. It might just mean that you haven't yet put enough resistance in the system. The resistance, remember, is from your coffee. If you haven't ground that fine enough, if you don't have serious channeling, all the rest, if you haven't ground fine enough, or if you have a lot of channeling, whatever, you might not get to the 9 bars. So it's generally speaking, if you have a problem with the gauge not working, it's rarely the gauge is the problem. The gauge is almost always not the problem. Every once in a while, it could be something else, like maybe some foreign material. When they tap that thread, a little piece of plastic got lodged in the port. That might be it. But generally speaking, it's almost always, you just need to grind finer. You need a better grinder. Some people are on the finest setting of their grinders, their budget grinders, and they're not getting any resistance at all. You need to know what 30, 40, 50 pounds feels like. If you can feel like you're actually putting 50 pounds and the gauge isn't moving, then there's a problem there. Contact us, we'll figure it out. If you think you have a loss of pressure in the system, you would see it. You're going to have water squirting out from any of the places where we have O-rings. If you don't see water squirting out at you, there's no loss of pressure. The O-rings are still working. I haven't really come across anybody that's really had to replace these O-rings over like normal use. It's only if they've lost it, nicked it, or if they just feel like something's not right and they're losing pressure and they go out and buy them for no reason. Again, you'll know if you need a new O-ring if it's leaking from somewhere. You'll see that water. Just because you're not building pressure, you're not getting the gauge to work or whatever, there's no loss of pressure in the system. You just haven't built up the resistance you need in the coffee bed. If you do have a leak, then it's probably from right here. And it's probably because inside here there are 2 O-rings. There's one right here on the threads, and there's another one in the pocket. And sometimes they get damaged going in and out, that kind of thing. Just make sure you have both O-rings. Make sure that, again, there's no obstructions or something else. And then make sure that you tighten this back down, finger tight, until it stops, and then only back it out until you can read it. You keep backing it out, you're going to unseat the O-ring, you are going to have a leak. Sprays and spurts from the bottom of the coffee bed. So again, this is channeling issues. Generally speaking, with a bottomless portafilter, there's a risk involved because if things aren't right, it's going to spray in different directions. If you're just dialing in a new coffee, use your spouts on this or that one. If you're going to be learning something, or if you can't handle it for a while and it's making a mess, try to use a spout until you get your times right and your resistance right. And once you get in that 6-8 bars for 45 seconds, 40 seconds, then you're probably going to be all right. Also keep in mind, the faster and harder I go to 9 bars or 8 bars or 7 bars, the more chances I can break apart that coffee bed and channel through it. That's why I like to do a nice slow ramp into pressure. It generally ends up working out better. You get less sprays and spurts. So if you have sprays and spurts coming through there, probably means better distribution, better grinder, that you need also to grind a little bit finer, that kind of thing. So that's generally it. But again, use a spout. One thing I want to cover here that comes up a bit, the differences between this portafilter and this. You can see that this skirt here is a lot longer and it's basically connected to the side of the filter. Whereas this one has a little bit of a channel just before you get to the skirt, and the skirt's a lot shorter in terms of the height of it. It's very rare that you'll get what we call side drips coming from here on a Pro. And that's because the way that the basket sits a little bit lower and has a bit of a moat or a channel around it before it goes over to the walls and goes down. So what happens is the coffee comes out of your portafilter through the bottom and it goes in every which direction, but because of surface tension and cohesion and viscosity, it ends up going to the sides and then coming back and centering out and streaming through. Problem with this particular one is because of the construction and the way that we had to build this, we weren't able to, this is all machined stainless steel, but because this is a thinner basket and everything else, we had to create some supports here and we couldn't create that channel around there. So what you do get from time to time, even I do, is side drips. It doesn't mean you're channeling. It just means that, it doesn't always mean that you're channeling, but it's a good indicator, especially if, again, you have metal here and voids and that sort of thing. But it just means that what happened was your coffee came out, went to the sides, got to the plastic, which is got a lot of friction, coefficient of friction there. It's going to grab that stream of coffee and it's going to keep bringing it down. So don't get too bummed. I know if you're trying to put something on Instagram or Facebook, having some side drips is like a super bummer. Believe me, I know, because the guy who had to create all the content, back in the day, if I got one of those, I couldn't upload it because people get all upset about it. So I understand where you're coming from. I feel you. But again, there's other things you can be paying attention to know whether or not you're channeling. Don't just pay attention to those side drips. Grind a little bit finer, slow ramp, pre-infusion. Pre-infusion, I didn't mention that real quick. A pre-infusion, for those uninitiated, just means I'm pushing some water into the coffee bed at low pressure, kind of like 1 to 3 bars, somewhere in there, not more than 3 bars generally. And I'm basically saturating the pot, getting the whole thing wet because coffee is hydrophobic and we want to have a nice even extraction. If you hit it real fast and hard, you're going to hit like maybe some moisture in here and have some dry areas here, and it's going to possibly channel a little bit more in that area where it didn't really get into the coffee bed. So it's good to come in for the first 5-8 seconds, slowly initiate, push some water into the bed. As you start to see, as I did, some drips, then once you start to get a couple drips in the cup, I call that extracting. I don't call that pre-infusion anymore because I'm extracting into my cup. And I don't want my coffee brewed at 3 bars or 2 bars. I want my coffee brewed at 7 or 8 bars. So at that point, whatever's going on, I generally just go right into pressure. And that pre-infusion helps to deal with channels, helps to deal with a better extraction. So keep in mind though, if you run your pre-infusions out too long, some people go 20 seconds, 25, you're losing temperature all the time. So if you're not starting with, say, water much hotter than you want to actually brew at, and you run that pre-infusion out longer, then you're not going to actually be brewing at the target temperature. So if you like to do a 20-second or 25-second, go ahead and use water off boil. Go ahead and give it 20-25 seconds. By the time you actually get to the point of pulling that shot, now your water is going to have dropped into the sweet zone of 204, 206 degrees, somewhere in there, and you're going to be good to go. But for me, I'm boiling at 92 degrees. It's about 198, I think, in Fahrenheit. And I don't have that time to play with. So I just keep it short, 5 to 8 seconds, and go right into it, because otherwise I'm dropping into temperatures that are not good for extraction. Let's see, sour. That comes up every day in the group. So the Facebook group, again, if you don't do Facebook, I don't do Facebook. If you look at my profile page, my main page, my feed, I don't put anything in there. I don't spend any time on Facebook aside from the groups. A wealth of information in these groups, a lot of very helpful people. We have over 6,500 people now, 6,600 people in the Brew with Flair group on Facebook, and there'll be a link here in a minute. And everybody's helping everybody, especially right now. People have really stepped it up. So if you have these issues, these questions, go in there, check it out. But real quick, on the sour thing, there's a couple things that could be happening. Your coffee just might have a lot of acidity that is too much for you, for your palate. Again, this is a very concentrated brew. So even though that coffee worked good for you in a much larger volume of extraction over a certain time and whatever, it may not taste really good to you as espresso in that small quantity, that very pungent extraction. Also might mean that you had some channeling issues. So even though the times and everything out were right, if it was channeling through, you're under extracting parts of your bed and over extracting other parts. So that's going to change things too. Come in with as much thermal energy as you want. You're probably using a lighter roast or a medium roast if you call it sour. Again, these need more energy. They need more care, more work to get a good extraction. Make sure that you actually like that coffee as espresso. So make sure you go try it somewhere else, have somebody else brew it on another machine at the coffee shop. Make sure you really like it, because you might not like that coffee. But if you do like that coffee as espresso, then things to work on is more temperature, more thermal heat. Lower your dose. The lower the dose is, generally speaking, you're going to have an easier time to work with it, extract it. Check your water, use some third wave. Make sure you're getting good water, because your water can screw up your extraction as well. What else is in there for that? Better puck prep. These kind of things are all ways to improve on that. No crema. Coffee needs to be fresh, guys. Again, if you bought it from the store and it says it's good for 1 year, because that's usually what it is. If it says goodbye date, it's usually a full year they think you can use that coffee. I mean, to each their own, but I don't want to use coffee that hasn't been properly preserved, at least within the first month and a half of actually roasting. So don't go by best by dates, go by roasted on dates. Make sure that you know that coffee was actually roasted in the last 7, 21, 45 days. At that point, you've pretty much lost the CO2 you need, because that's what creates the bubbles. The same fizz in your soda is what makes your crema. Without it, you've got no bubbles. So you won't have any of that. Dry pucks, I talked about a trick for that. Back-to-back pools, I talked about that. Dialing in, we talked about that. So when you hear numbers on the internet, on Reddit and these other places, and they're giving you like 25, 27 seconds, I told you earlier, ignore that. It's a little bit different. Let your flavors, your palate and taste be the dictator as to how long that shot needs to be. Some people pull crazy long shots. I've seen people say they love their shots at 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes, 1 minute. Unheard of. But the beauty is, with a manual machine, you can play with temperature and time and pressure and all these things in ways you can't, in the ways that those people that are giving you their prescriptions can't. So they're stuck with a 9-bar machine set at whatever that is, 198. And these are the things that, in that realm, those numbers work. Well, we don't have that restriction, and therefore you can find some really tasty coffee brewed very long. It almost never works out brewed very short. So I would say try to keep your shots running out at least 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Again, 1.3 times whatever you read out there, whatever the bag says, go longer. How much force, talked about the scale. Which grind setting, talked about that. How to read a shot, talked about that. Stick to the same coffee for a while, talked about that. All right, I'm going to quit on that. And I'm going to move into if anybody's still there. I don't know, is anybody still here? What do we got? Sorry, I went overtime. Yeah, people are hanging on. Cool. Let me go back to me and into the chat and run through those real quick. And then we'll see what you guys got for me. Let's see. Click to the computer. Sometimes on a PC. Oh, this is all helping people with their audio. Christmas, yes, me too, great. Not quite dialed in. Shots, but the Americanos I made last 2 days have been amazing. Generally speaking, if it's too much acidity, that kind of thing, add some hot water to it afterwards. It almost always improves. So the Americano is basically adding, I forgot the actual, I don't do Americanos, but just add some more hot water from your kettle after the shot. If it's just a little bit too much for you, it helps to dilute, and it usually works out a little bit better. Thanks, David. Do you recommend we start timing our shots at the end of pre-infusion? Good question. I don't so when I tell you 30 seconds or 35 or 40 seconds, I'm just talking about the pull. The pre-infusion is a separate thing, and that's kind of up to you. Again, I told you some guidelines to work with that. If we were talking brew ratios, that's part of my brew ratio. I would tell you I'm going to run 8 seconds, 10-second pre-infusion, and then I'm going to pull for 30 or 35, 40 seconds. Problem is, on the internet, most people don't tell you about pre-infusion. They just like, oh, 35 seconds, 9 bars, whatever. So that's where like I try to just keep my pull times the same as their pull times, because most people with machines don't have any pre-infusion. It's very rare with the sub $500 range, even $800 ranges, for them to actually have a pre-infusion that you can have control of. Some of them kind of 5-8 seconds are built in, preset, but you don't know what people are using. So when I relay just a pull time, it's just a pull time. I have an oat brew and Skeleton. So hopefully with the oat brew, you guys are going to be able to get some espresso burrs, because at the finest setting right now with the oat brew, it's a great grinder for a drip filter right now, but it's not going to work for espresso. And your Hario is going to take you 5-7 minutes. Good luck with that, Adam. What do you usually do with your dial-in shots? I like to keep dialing in after 3 shots, but my hands get so shaky. Oh, so let me show you. This is what I was doing that you couldn't see. You see people pulling like this, or even hanging, doing some crazy stuff. Get your flare down low. You know, my table is really high, 40 inches right now. So it's a lot harder for me to lean into it, but use your upper body weight and your torso and your head. What I do is I pull my handle down here, and then I just arm bar it and lean in like this. So just lean into your pull, and that way it's almost like you're falling asleep on it and you're not actually, you know, using your arms. You have to be using your arms if you're getting tired. Believe me, I understand though. We do these at trade shows, and I'm pulling 50 easily to 100 in shots. And by the end of it, I'm just like, not from the coffee or the caffeine, but from all the workout. So put this lower down. The lower I get this flare down here on a table, low table, that kind of thing, I can just lean into it, push on it. Don't pull on it. Don't push on it that way. Lean into it. If you see people's flares kind of moving across the table as they're pulling a shot, it's because they're too far back here and they're pushing it like this across. If you come in, you lean right over it, put your weight into it, you're going to be putting a lot of your force right down into the table. This isn't going to slide around on you. So get your body over it, lean into it, arm bar it, keep it down low. Those are all tricks. Any ideas what to grind to the finest? The ode. And then a regrind. Good luck with that. Yeah, it might work out. Go to the finest on the ode and then throw it in the Hario skirt. But it's going to be hard, because without the bean weight, it's not going to want to get through those. It's not going to want to push in to those small little burrs you got there with the Hario. So I don't know how that's going to work. Thanks, Michael. Take it easy. Sorry, this went way over time. One more thing I was going to throw in there, though. Somebody asked about so back to dialing in. What's a good grind? I would say when I try to relay, it's really hard, but I'd say it should be a soft but kind of gritty sand. You want to, when you're grinding for, say, a 58, a larger basket, 58 millimeter basket, it's going to mostly be powdery, soft powder. If you're grinding for the flare, you want to have some powder in there, because it's naturally going to be there with like I said, the distribution curve, but you want to feel a little bit of grit. So some people have said like table sugar, or maybe like a brown sugar. Go for something that is soft, but a little bit of grit. So I just say like kind of a soft but gritty sand. I don't know if that helps. One way to go. All right, I think that's it for me. I'm going to say, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask while you got me. Anybody? And I'm also going to set up the poll for the exit poll, which I wanted to try to get out of anybody still here. So any questions for me? If you want to unmute or add them to chat, I'll hang out for a little bit longer. Looks like everybody's ready to go. It's been a long day, and it's a new year. All right, I guess that's it. Unless anybody else has it. So thanks again for joining us. If you're just still here, you'll probably see in the poll, we've got a few places you can reach us: Instagram, service, also the Facebook group. I highly recommend you get in there. Bunch of good peeps helping each other out, and you'll see me there all the time. So if you have more questions down the line, you can pop it in there. But it's really helpful when you share videos and photos of what you're doing or what your issues are, as opposed to just, writing in about them in an email. That helps us to kind of get, because, your perception or your context is different than ours. So when you get to the group and you really want some help, try to video that with your phone or put a photo in, give as much information as you can so people can be more helpful that way. So thanks again for choosing Flair for your espresso needs. Look forward to seeing you in the Facebook group, and you guys all enjoy your 2021 and the rest of your weekend. Take care.